Hey, Wealth Warriors, are you ready to redefine wealth and master your money mindset? Welcome back to Women of Wealth. I'm your Gen X host, Holly Woods Gray.
And I'm your millennial host, Ali Ramo. Today we're sitting down with visionary Brooke Page-Thompson from Velocity Advisory Group. And Brooke has a powerful story about what it truly takes to succeed as a female leader, moving past the exhausting effort of splitting personalities to truly finding her best self. And throughout our conversation, we'll dive into her distinctive leadership style, how she navigates workplace environments, and the critical financial decisions that fuel growth.
From the nuances of cash versus accrual accounting to the essential prep work needed when a company is getting ready to expand, get ready for a masterclass in authenticity, leadership, culture building, and smart financial strategies. Let's welcome Brooke Page-Thompson.
Thanks, ladies. It's great.
We're so glad you're here.
Yeah, me too.
So, Brooke, I know we gave a little introduction about you, but can you tell our audience, a little bit about your background and how you got to Velocity Advisory Group?
Sure. I'll try and give you the short version because we could be here for days. But started out as undergrad in elementary ed, and I decided when I was student teaching I don't like kids that much, so I went into adult learning instead, which I've quickly learned was very similar to elementary school learning. But I did that for a while, and then I got into consulting on the HR people side. So I've been in the last 25 years really focusing on leadership strategies, career planning, succession planning, leadership development programs, culture. I dabbled a little bit in ERP and implementation efforts with large technology platforms, but I really love the people side of business. And in 2019, I had what my mom called my second midlife crisis. I was 38 and was in a really bad job. I really had a horrible leadership team that was very toxic, very negative, and I left with the intention that if I was ever going to go back into the workforce full time, I had to have some very specific things that had to be present. And a year and a half later, I took an engagement with Velocity, and after that, oversaw all of our leadership development programs, and then moved into partner, and then took the president role about 18 months ago. And just absolutely love my team and what we do. And in the background, I've had this yoga thing as well, which has really been powerful to blend something I really love into what I can provide to my team and to my clients, and vice versa for all of my teachers at the studio. So it's been a wild journey, but it's been fun and engaging, and I love to share whatever I can with anyone that'll listen. So
great. I agree with you that teaching adults can sometimes be like teaching children.
A little bit.
I call it herding cats most of the time. But it is what it is.
It is. It is. You got to start somewhere, right?
Absolutely. So you mentioned in a previous discussion that splitting personalities is exhausting. How did you recognize that compartmentalizing was draining? And what did the journey look like to find your whole self, to be your best self in your professional world?
It's a really good call out of this, because when you hear the word splitting personalities, a lot of thoughts can come up with that. But I realized probably 8 or 9 years ago, I was bopping around from role to role because it sounded interesting, or the client was doing cool work. And so I hadn't really figured out what I ultimately wanted to offer to the world from just how I show up and how I choose to engage with my people and my clients. And in one of my last jobs, I had this moment of like, I can't be authentically who I am in this position because it doesn't ultimately align with where my boss is. She doesn't embrace curiosity. She's, in a role she probably shouldn't have been in herself at the time. And I really had to take a step back and say, what is it that's causing what I like to call pain, right? Every time you come into the office and you're like, it just isn't me. I don't like getting up in the morning. We call it the the Monday blues, or the sad Mondays on Sunday night. And I just didn't like living like that. And so I realized very quickly I had to make a decision. I either was going to stay and accommodate to whatever they needed versus asking for accommodation for myself. And that isn't what I wanted to do. So this theme that Allie kind of brought up at the beginning of our chat today on authenticity has become a big part for me. And I know for some people that's a buzzword that's been out there, especially since the pandemic, whether it's a good word or a bad word. But I keep coming back to, if you're feeling like you're splitting your personality and you are not able to show up as your true self in whatever you do, your team can feel it, your clients can feel it, your partners can feel it, and they know something's off and is about to erode. And that's where if we start to talk about culture, it really starts to show up in how a company's culture starts to form is when people aren't showing up authentically. The culture is kind of creating these offshoots of culture. We call them subcultures within a culture, that can actually be really damaging to the success of a business. So I really didn't want to do that anymore and decided that whatever I did next, I didn't want to be afraid to show up how I am, who I am. And if where I'm working at doesn't respect that or honor that, then we probably need to have a different conversation. So
I think as a leader, sometimes it can be hard to nurture having that authentic culture, because if you've created a system and then someone doesn't fit specifically in that system really well, you have to learn as a leader to be flexible with different types of personalities and having people work together. So how do you nurture that in the workplace? And Velocity contracts with different companies, so that's something that they talk about too with different companies and leaders. Could you go into that?
yeah, so when you look at how you are empowering others and how clients can really help nurture this out of people, it's hard because I think I heard on another podcast the other day that we've got 5 generations in the workforce right now. And so when you've got that span of understanding of what work is, just even the definition of work has drastically changed from a boomer mindset all the way to Gen Z. And my guess is, Haley and Allie, that both of you, being a millennial and a Gen Xer, might define how work is for you or was for you early on in your career. And it's really helping companies lean into this fact of, just because someone at the top of the organization grew up in a more rigid, hierarchical 8 to 5 mentality, you work 60 hours a week, that's how you prove your worth. That's not what's translating to the incoming generations. They don't want to work the same way. So now we've got this huge chasm of understanding of what it means to show up to a job and do a job. And the leadership skills necessarily aren't changing. It's how we're asking leaders to show up in the room, to be authentic, to understand this balance that starts to happen when we give people autonomy and we trust them to do their jobs. Micromanagement was a big thing with boomers because it's the only way we could have proven that people were doing their jobs. And then you've got this other group that's like, don't talk to me unless something's wrong. And we have to help companies bridge the gap. And that's a lot of what we do in our programs is helping companies lean into, how do you have those conversations? How do you find the right balance and make everybody feel like they're heard and still have growth and progressive targets that you can hit effectively for your business?
So at Velocity, is it a broker dealer or is it a training company?
We're a consulting firm, so we do leadership training and we do executive coaching. We also do strategic consulting work. So we really focus on the people side of the business, and most of our work is obviously through third-party companies that hire us to come in and do stuff.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's really interesting to think about all the different generations working together. Those that didn't start off using phones, like the boomer generation, and even the Gen Xers, and then those who haven't known what a real, like a attached to the wall phone even is.
Yeah, I mean, even just like I'm borderline Gen X millennial. I say I'm Gen X more than millennial, but I do lean more millennial in how I think. But like even this last couple of weeks, trying to wrap my head around like really leaning into what can AI actually do to help me do my job better, because now we're getting asked by our clients, like, what do we do with this concept? And there's just some people that are like, my brain doesn't even want to go there, because to your point, they've had to move from, I had to walk down an office to talk to, or a hallway to talk to someone, to a fax machine, to this random computer screen that ran DOS, to Outlook, to internet, to fill in the blank. And then there's a generation that's in the workforce. It's like, I've had a phone since I was 2. What do you mean this is hard to understand?
Yeah.
It's just a completely different mindset that we don't understand that the neuroplasticity of the brain is really impressive, and it's moving much faster in the younger generations because they've been exposed to things much quicker than most of the other ones were. So they're able to adapt and change to things very fast, but the depth into which they understand things isn't quite the same.
Yeah, and that brings up a really good point too. Like, can you elaborate a little bit on trusting others, which is a critical component to leadership, right? So if there's a foundation of trust with your team, how do you build that trust among generations?
We get asked that question a lot. So it's a good one. And it really depends on the type of company. So we have this proprietary tool framework that's called the cultural archetype matrix, and it looks at 8 competencies or dimensions that most companies tend to fall in. So that could be a company who's more revenue focused, so they're external customer focused, everything's tied to a revenue driven target and very high goals and standards. Like Apple would be a company that's focused. Tech is typically focused more on revenue, versus companies that are more entrepreneurial or collaborative. Maybe they're creating content that people are consuming. So the differences in how you would hire and create cultures for those 2 companies would be very different, because the type of workforce that we're growing and training is needing to hit different goals. But the trust factor always comes down to, we call it psychological safety. So if there's not psychological safety, regardless of where you fall in that grid of 8 core competencies, if people don't feel like they can show up authentically at work, who they are, how they live their lives, their values aren't respected, they can't have conflict. Like if companies don't allow for people to have difference of opinion and let them share those opinions and then come to a conclusion, together, we typically find that trust is very hard to build once that's broken, or if it was never established in the first place. Psychological safety can really make a company fantastic, or it can break a company. And there's actually research on this. If any of your listeners want to go and check it out, it's called Project Aristotle. I think it was the New York Times did a big article on Google. This was 10 or 12 years ago, and they asked one simple question with Amy Edmondson. What made the most successful teams at Google successful? And they thought it was going to be because of IQ. And what it came down to was it was actually how safe that team felt to challenge and push and support each other, fall on the sword if they made a mistake, own up to their mistakes. That is what actually made the most successful teams work at Google, not so much because they were staffed with a bunch of really smart people.
That's interesting. I'm going to look into that. So those are some signs of like good workplace culture, having a sense of safety, good communication, some openness. What are some indicators that, you may hold your team back? Leadership may be holding their team back, or the company culture in general could be holding the team back.
So when we look at teams and, if you run a 360 on a leader, or you do an engagement survey, or all the cool assessment tools that are out there to help you find out what people feel or how they're thinking, a lot of times we see that it's not so much that trust in their direct manager is broken, it's the manager's manager or above. So that oftentimes comes down to a gap in communication. And we typically see communication as being pushed down from the top, and it normally kind of hits a roadblock at a certain level, because at some point the communication starts to die out a little bit, because there's only so much I can share with you at certain levels. And then if I, as the leader, have to now go tell my team something I don't have all the answers to, I may choose not to tell them, or I may choose to only share snippets, which then makes the team trust the leader, because they're like, oh, well, you're sharing with me. But now I don't trust the senior leaders because you don't have the full picture and you can't share exactly what's going on. And that's normally where we see the breakdown start, is this concept of trust in manager and communication from the top. We start to see it eke in a little bit when leaders that either have imposter syndrome, which, by the way, we all have it. Imposter syndrome is a real thing. If a leader has imposter syndrome, or they feel like they're inadequate in their job, they oftentimes hold people back that might be showing more capability or promise in the role than maybe what they're able to step into. And rather than seeing that as a growth opportunity for the employee, it's seen as a derailer for the manager, because, well, what if you take my job? What am I going to do? And really, a lot of this breakdown in trust comes from, and not bad cultures, but challenging cultures, is fear. People are just afraid of what they don't know, what they can't touch, what they don't understand. And if they can't get answers to their questions, they start to stop talking in meetings. They stop sharing innovative ideas. When we see companies start to lose people very quickly, right? Like if one person leaves an organization and that gives permission for 10 other people to go, there's something wrong that needs to be addressed. And if you're not addressing it, people just wait for that one really brave person to be like, I'll start and we'll go. That's normally a sign that when we come in to help with companies like that, where we're like, let's look at the leadership team and really see, are you displaying the behaviors you're asking of your people? Can people come up with different ways of doing things without being told that's stupid, or go back to the drawing board without clarity or guidance? Those are some of the top ones that we tend to see really start to highlight for companies that their culture is going in a different direction. Lack of trust, people stop communicating, there's little to no innovation. And you've probably heard the term job hugging. It's coming up a lot right now with a lot of our clients. So pandemic time, 2020, we saw, it was called the boomerang effect, where people were leaving jobs because they could go to the same industry, same role, and get a ton of money for what they were doing. We saw this in life sciences in particular, because they were all doing drug analysis for the vaccine. And so all of these big drug testing companies were just taking whoever they wanted and paying them a ton of money. 2 years later, those people were like, it wasn't better over here. I'd rather go back to my old job because I actually liked the culture over there. So we saw this boomerang effect come into 2024, and we've got just chaos, what feels like chaos in the world, all over the world. And people are afraid to move because AI's come into play. They're not sure where their job's going to fit in anymore. How do we financially do things if we're going to offshore a bunch of work? And now you've got people job hugging because there's not enough of the like critical thinking positions are not being created right now. I think we're seeing that change a little bit, because we're realizing AI is helpful, but it can't do the thing that a lot of these more skilled humans can do, nor will it probably ever get there, because there's still an element of human that has to be involved in all of this. So job hugging is a real thing right now. People are just staying where they are. And that's causing some rift in cultures as well, because they're not really on board, but they're not really off board. They're just kind of showing up, doing their job, getting a paycheck, and going home.
It's interesting. How do you find that in companies that have independent contractors, like insurance companies and whatnot? Have you worked with any
We have
where
some
they're like more self-motivated than job motivated, I guess, or paycheck motivated?
Yeah, we work with a lot of different insurance, financial institutions, and I think what we're finding there is if you're a rock star A player and you're driven by personal goals and commission or money, if you're part of a company that can't make decisions, waffles back and forth, constantly is making changes, that is hard to figure out, how do I take this to my customer, or how am I going to sell this? They're not going to stick around for very long. So we typically see the higher performers in those instances tend to leave very quickly, because they just aren't going to sit around and wait for someone to figure it out. They're going to go figure it out.
Yeah, and going back to, the trust in, not your manager, but your manager's manager. I mean, to me, I imagine that's like a loss of trust in executive leadership. And how are there different ways that, executives can kind of, because sometimes I think we imagine executives just have this office on the second floor and everyone, they oversee everyone, but no one ever communicates with the executives. So would you recommend in that case, when there is a loss of, the higher managing or executive team, that there is more communication that goes directly from there? Is that kind of the solution, or are there other methods or frameworks that you guys use?
It's so sticky, Allie, because when you're an executive, you're privy to a lot of information that you just can't share sometimes, and that is the hardest conversation we have to have with teams. Is, I know you really want to know what's going on. I know you want to know why that person was terminated, right? I know you really want to know why that person just decided to retire. Like, there are things that happen that you can't have information or access to because of law, right? HR policies. There's things that just can't happen that employees don't really understand 2 or 3 layers down. And even if you share that with them, they're like, but why? I'm part of the company. If you really value my opinion, you would share with me these things that are going on. And so often when we go in, we say, what are the things that maybe we're not communicating effectively that we can do better at, and we can give more detail and insight into, versus the things that we can be really honest about, that these things, I'll never be able to give you more clarity than high level, because they're things that just can't be shared outside of certain rooms, right? We see that with acquisition too. You're about ready to acquire a company or get bought. There's only a certain amount of people that can know some things in case the deal falls through. So employees have to lean in just as much as the leaders need to lean in. And I think that's a misconception sometimes, that employees think that I'm not part of this problem. It's all the leader's fault. And it's like, sure, they play a role in this, and we can all do better. We can all lean in and ask the right questions and have, listening tours or whatever we're going to do to get feedback. But just saying I'm going to communicate more isn't actually going to help. There's something else happening. It's systemic from something else that we need to find. What is the actual root cause of the disconnect, and then find a way to solve for that before we tackle the communication issue.
Well, and from a leadership standpoint too, like I find I have a fairly large team at Appreciation Financial, and I have about 20 first line leaders. And for years, I've been having a Wednesday call. We used to do it like every Wednesday, and then we started doing it every other week. And recently we just stopped doing it because people stopped showing up. And one of my strengths is being transparent as far as what I know. I don't tell everything, because there are, like you just said, there's some things that, number one, doesn't really affect my team that are happening within the company, or number two, it just hasn't been tested yet to make sure it's true before I share it, so, but I find like there's some people who have been with me a long time, like 10 plus years, and they just don't care anymore about being in that, even though they've earned this leadership role and they're making, the amount of money that they want to make. It's just not important for them to plug in anymore too. So it does take 2 to tango, or 20 in my case.
For sure. And I think when you see shifts like that starting to happen on a team, we have this thing called the inside scoop, and it's like 20 questions that we give to all of our leadership program attendees and say, go do the 20 questions with your team. And there's 3 or 4 that I love because they're all helpful, but there are a few that they're like, I don't need to ask that question. I already know. And I'm like, I promise you probably don't, because you've never asked the question. So something as simple as, do you prefer communication through email, text, or a Slack or a Teams channel? Typically, we think people like to be communicated to the way we want to be communicated to. So I've had employees where I'll text them, and then a month or 2 later, they're like, you need to stop texting me. Like, I don't want that to be in my feed on my phone. Put it in a Teams channel and I'll check it over there. So but I never thought to ask the question. Yeah. So just getting really clear on like, what kind of communication do you want me to give you at this stage in your journey? So you don't feel left out. I don't waste my time communicating things that you don't see value in. And we start to co-create this layer of, what do I need as the leader from you? And then what do you need from me? And we constantly are having that dialogue to make sure as you change, I can pivot with you to make sure I'm still engaging you in a way that's helpful.
Yeah.
But it does take 2 to tango.
Yes, I love that. You know, we are quick to point fingers at executive or higher managing, but it does take, you know, the entire company or all of the people to have that communication and understanding and, you know, respect of the what does the military say? Like their rank. Yeah. Yeah.
Chain of command.
There you go. Thank you. Well, I did want to shift a little bit because you had shared that, you know, you are working on expanding Velocity Advisory Group, and that means finances had to kind of change in how you look at them and how you measure the company. So would you like to talk about that a little bit and kind of where you're at now, or what kind of patterns are you seeing that you're shifting into?
Yeah, so when I started at Velocity, we were about half the size that we are now. So we've had 25% growth year over year on average the last 5.5, 6 years. And, you know, that's a lot of, we just have really great consultants that do great work. We have a lot of referrals that come in from clients that we've worked with in the past. And so the growth is great, but when we really sat down to look at like margins and what were we actually bringing home at the end of the day, we had to really, we got with our CPA firm, but it was really just taking a hard look at what are our true costs to run the business. All of our employees are virtual, so we don't have overhead for like an office space, which would be another whole different layer. But to not have that meant that the expenses that we're putting out are primarily people. And so you can't cut, you know, corners with people if you're going to do good work. So we really had to start looking at, well, how are we like looking at our money? Is it based on cash in is cash out? Or are we looking at it, cash in is now accrued over time based on the statement of work, because the engagement's for 9 months, we get paid in sections, but we don't get paid till after the work's done. So technically it should cover what was there, but before it was cash in, cash out. And it was starting to complicate how we were able to make strategic business decisions, because on paper it looked like it was great, but when you actually went to go do the investment, it was like, well, there's not much there. And so we had to really start to get a better accounting system in place that helped us, even if we got paid in full from a client on day one, take that money, and we've gotten really clear on like, this much goes into operating cash flow, this much money goes into a high yield savings account, this much money comes out every month, so we can start to plan for things like 401ks, and because we do safe harbor, which is a one-time a year payment into employees' 401k accounts. But that's a chunk of money that has to come out once a year, and if you're not preparing for it, you're like, where is that gonna come from? So we've just been really mindful the last 2 years of what are all of our big expenditures that happen on an annual basis, not tied to payroll, that we need to start accruing money towards, so that when the money comes in, we're very clear on what we actually have to spend for that month, versus it just looking like, oh, we have all this money in our bank account, we should be able to do all kinds of investments and things. And it's like, but that money we really need in 6 months when the actual work has been completed. So that mindset shift has been extremely helpful, but it was hard the first year, moving away from, just because it's there doesn't mean we can do much with it. We got to really look at where it needs to be spread and how it needs to be spread. And I know, talking about expansion, if you're going to grow, you have to be really clear on like, how much do you need in every month? What does your sales pipeline and funnel have to do to support that? So how far out do we need to build the funnel? How guaranteed are you to get some of that revenue in the door? What if we have another war happen where, you're expecting $1 million in a quarter or whatever the number is, and you're at third of that, right?
Yeah.
Because buying signals softened again. And so you always got to be ready for the what ifs. Not to say that you shouldn't be aggressive and go after high targets, but you have to know that there's always going to be fluctuations in the market and buying signals. We're just in a really weird purchasing pattern the last 2 or 3 years. And so I can't say that there's any magic formula that gets you there, because in an instant, it could completely turn a corner and you're in a different financial status than you were before.
Yeah.
Positive or negative.
One of the things we as a company had to make a decision on, and at the end of the day, the CEO had to make a decision, is there's a lot of talks about us possibly going to war with Cuba. We were supposed to go to Costa Rica over the summer for our trip, for our 100K trip and our president's circle. And so we moved it out to November to see if there's some changes. We'll just say that. Let's say there's some changes. And we also changed to a new location that's not as close to Cuba. Costa Rica is only like 900 miles from Cuba. And so we're planning on going somewhere else. But like, people don't really understand that, because they only look at how it impacts them. But if you look at it from a bigger picture, like I have to, and like the people who are making the decisions have to, if something happened during that time when we were on the trip, number one, all of our top producers are on that trip, so what does that do to the company? And then number two, if one person, even if they're in the wrong place at the wrong time and something happens to them, then where's the liability? And again, it's all of our top producers there, and could we rebound from something happening to one person, whether that's canceled travel, whether that's getting sick at a resort, whether that's, all the way to something worse than that, and so there are a lot of things that we think about at a leadership level that the average person or the average agent within our company might not consider. And they're like, oh, it's no big deal, I'd go there, Yeah, well, you go right ahead and you go there. But as a company, we have to think about all of the people, not just you.
Yeah, it's such a good call out that you don't know what pressure there is until you actually take a seat at the table. And I just remember I've had a few moments since I've been at Velocity. My last big job was for a large telecom, primarily. I'm in Denver, so we were headquartered here, but had a lot of operations in Europe. And I supported the CHRO, and we did a lot of board presentations. And that was my role as part of the strategy team, was to help get ready for that. And so there was divestitures happening, and there was executive comp issues that were coming up for all of the teams. And there was just a lot of moving parts. And I remember she would be frazzled by the end of the day when we always had our spot for board deck reviews, and we'd get them thrown back at us like, this is crap, like, what are you thinking? And I just remember being like, she can't tell me what she wants. She's like burnout to no end and just frazzled, and just she's responding to everything in a very aggressive way. And so after I left that job, I've been at Velocity for a little bit. I get a deck from my marketing team, and I had a moment where I was like, I know why she threw that deck back at me, because I got the same thing from an employee who didn't understand the level of responsibility that went with the presentation that was behind it.
Yeah.
And so you have to look at every opportunity as a learning moment, but there's been these little moments of I could scream and yell and be angry about this, or we can use it as a learning opportunity. And we both understand, like, I don't want you to do this again. Here's what I would like in return. And then they have a chance to ask questions, and it becomes less contentious than you're an executive, and so you can just do whatever you want. You don't understand. To I probably do understand, and I have to make different decisions because of the responsibility that's on me in the role that I'm in today.
Yeah. And I also think that when you're not in that leadership role, I mean, when you are in that leadership role, it's really good feedback for you and your communication style.
Mhm.
I've had to learn that a lot of, I mean, it's just kind of like parenting too. However, like you do something and you're like, okay, let's see how this lands. You know what I mean? And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, but it's really not, I mean, if I don't get what I want from whatever employee or agent that I'm asking it from, a lot of times it's because I'm not clear on what I want, not necessarily that they can't provide it. And I learned a long time ago when my husband and I first got married that I can either have it the way I want it. I can either have what I want done, or I can have him do it my way and it might not get done. So what do I want? At the end of the day, I want to get the job done, right? I don't really care how he gets to it or how anyone else gets to it. So it's just a learning lesson. I think leadership has to learn over time. Is number one, you can have it all your way, but having it all your way doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be right.
Yeah, and how much do we stifle people when we just prescriptively say, do this, 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 and this, and every time they come back, it's still not what we want. So it's like you got to find a better balance of how you're communicating what you want. And if they get there differently than how I would, awesome.
Yeah.
We still got
just
to
as long as
the
they
same
don't have to
place.
teach it to me, I'm good. No, I'm just kidding. So, so Brooke, one of the things that we do at the end of our podcast, as we wrap up, we like to do a quick lightning round. This is just a fun questions. Brief answers are perfect. You know, if you need to elaborate, then feel free to use 3, 4, 5 words. So, Allie, take it away.
All right. So, Brooke, what is one word to describe your leadership style?
Expansive.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
What is your go-to productivity hack?
I'm going to go a little controversial here, but learning how to use Claude. I've been trying it this week and integrating it into all of my stuff. What it just produced for me today, I was like, this is unbelievable. This is going to save me so much time. So lean in a little bit to the AI tools. Go take a boot camp because there's a lot of stuff you can learn.
Favorite business book or podcast you recommend?
Book. I've been loving this. A client had me read it. It's called Unreasonable Hospitality by
really good.
Will Guidera. Love the concepts in here. And podcasts, I have to talk about Velocity's Activating Greatness. There's some really good leadership lessons on there.
Awesome. A money myth you wish would go away forever?
That there's not enough for everybody.
And if you could sit down with any woman of wealth from the past or present, who would it be?
I really liked 2 that stood out to me. Yolanda Davis on pivoting and her L framework, and Dr. Is it Nelva Lee?
Nelva, yes.
Nelva,
Yeah.
Dr. Nelva Lee. Her focus on service and how she's looking at housing and education, I thought was really cool. So either of them I would take coffee with.
That's interesting. You went with our previous guest. Some people say like Oprah Winfrey or Michelle Obama or people we haven't interviewed. So that was really cool.
I think you guys, you're trying to bring women to the forefront, and you've had some really great guests on here. So I think there's a lot of lessons that are just nuggets hidden in here that are really good.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for listening to past podcast episodes.
For sure.
And thank you again, Brooke, for taking the time to meet with us today and letting us interview you for Women of Wealth. And I know I got some nuggets out of it. I'm sure Holly got some nuggets out of it. If someone, because you do work with businesses and leadership development trainings, if someone wanted to get connected with you, where could they find you?
LinkedIn is a great place to find me. Just Brooke Page, Page-Thompson. A lot of people like to put an I in there. There's no I in Page. Just go find me at Brooke Page-Thompson on LinkedIn, and there I've got all kinds of articles and insights and team stuff on there that might be helpful.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. Have a great day. It was nice
Thank
meeting
you
you.
both.